And this is like, maybe he can make a second video about this, and you know, we can use that for content too.
Greetings and welcome to another video. As neither I in my 18 minutes nor Asmongold in his 56 minutes could conclude a fitting outcome to this topic, I want to dive into Final Fantasy XIV vs WoW graphics again, but this time with a slightly more thought out analysis. First of all, we are both too passionate about these games and it's really hard to find objective values under these circumstances. However, the crux of the discussion laid out that both have quite bad visual fidelity compared to many other games on the market, which most commenters and chat agreed on. That means these two don't shine when it comes down to actual pixel count, realism and detailed looks of creatures, characters and environments. All these aspects are absolutely worth an upgrade on both games, which will happen at least on one of them very soon. On the other hand, they do offer a distinct art style already that appeals to a different type of audience, and you can find very good looking sequences in both games more often than not. Therefore, while digging a bit deeper into the whole discussion, here's a visual presentation of places and areas in both games that in my opinion look absolutely gorgeous. Neither of them are enhanced by shaders or mods, both in 4K resolution and the maxed out default settings both games offer without any third party application. And the final disclaimer, Zach and I are talking about subjective impressions of each game, so please keep that in mind for the further discussion. The first thing I want to address now is the fact that combat fluidity in Final Fantasy XIV is indeed something it fails at, and in which World of Warcraft performs much better. The snappy feel that is missing in comparison isn't compensated, and I cannot devaluate arguments about the engine feeling less responsive. However, the GCD and OGCD system tries to address this in a way that makes perfect sense at higher levels, and the more extensive your access to core mechanics and abilities, the more combat gets pushed to the next level and feels more satisfying. World of Warcraft still wipes the floor with Final Fantasy, and so do many other games when it comes to the intricate responsiveness. Asmongold, however, did make it clear that all of his discontent about FFXIV's combat boils down to this element when he stated combat is bad in his first reaction to Xeno's video. So we were actually talking past each other for the first 10 minutes of his reaction to my reaction. Something where I clearly stated I lacked the experience and expertise on many other MMOs on the market, I still fired some unnecessary shots at Guild Wars and especially Final Fantasy XI, which I apologize for. Final Fantasy XI had been my starting point into the MMO landscape, and its music, zones, characters and story will always remain an affirmative reminiscence to me. While being a bit clunky and some aspects lack the finishing touches that newer MMOs have, it's still being played by many fans of the series or the game itself, which is an astonishing achievement on its own, since this game has been around for 22 years now. So a big shout out to all those people still bringing life to Vana'diel for all this time. Alright, now to the actual discussion on graphics again. Final Fantasy XIV's biggest issue is lighting and shades, which many have pointed out in the comment section and every player that played the game for a decent amount of time has to admit. I mean, this is the whole reason why we use Reshade, GeForce Experience or other third-party solutions. And regarding these two, there are multiple posts of official Square Enix staff members that confirm their stance on accepting those shaders, as long as they only apply a filter on top of the game and don't modify or interact with files of it. And to be honest, this game can look insanely good with decent lighting applied, or even when just letting cutscenes play with any of these filters. So I'm really looking forward to the upgrade in 7.0. I guess when lighting is done right, which does happen quite often, especially in the sad cutscenes, this game has very good appearance, nothing to write home about, but also nothing that would ever keep me from playing the game. Basically because installing these shaders doesn't take more than 10 minutes and maintaining them is easier than keeping WoW add-ons up to date. And when it comes to my personal problem with World of Warcraft graphics that I felt becoming worse and worse since Warlords of Draenor, and I actually do believe many WoW players might agree on, is the Disney-esque art style they morphed the game into. The zones, dungeons and cities actually look very nice and have some awesome field design and architecture, but something about the character animations looks out of place to me, or at least out of the Warcraft universe that brought me to PC gaming. And I'm a big fan since Warcraft 3. So I personally really like the old school WoW graphic way more than what we have now, even if the newer graphics seem to have a higher visual fidelity. I think that not only the game did peak in Wrath of the Lich King for many of the gameplay and story elements alone, but also the art style was the perfect culmination of Western comic graphics, but still integrated that well-defined Warcraft-esque theme to it. That always had the necessary grit to resemble a war-torn world fighting off undead creatures and demons from other planets, which worked for story development and world building insanely well. For example, Shadowlands never looked menacing to me, even though it should have been the darkest expansion of the game, where in contrast I always felt the looming evil of the Western and Eastern Plague Lands. So I actually agree that from a subjective impression, even a classic World of Warcraft looks better on its overall ensemble. That mentioned, the world building on vanilla WoW is actually a masterpiece, and I have nothing but respect for the dev team for creating something that feels as complete as this game does, especially when it came out in 2004. And Asmongold is absolutely right, the open world aspect is way worse in Final Fantasy XIV, where World of Warcraft still shines to this day, having a feel of zones rightfully connecting together and making sense in their environmental design and being good plot devices too. But even though they are different in their world design and art style, without the base game of World of Warcraft and even to some extent Burning Crusade and Lich King, and especially not without Final Fantasy XI, 14 would not be the game it has become. So what does it all come down to? Personal preference. And I can tell you that from playing WoW since 2005 and Final Fantasy XIV since 2015. Both of these games are worth your time and money, even including their flaws and gameplay and graphical issues. But instead of listening to 1 or 2 or maybe even 4 people with less hair than the pixels they're raging about, try out these games for yourself to get the actual impression of them, rather than following the wild nostalgia of some old nerds like myself or Asmongold. If it makes fun, it's a good game that earns your time, and if it needs more than one game to avoid boredom, then go for it. Which means, whatever game it might be, World of Warcraft is great, and so is Final Fantasy.